You're listening to Out Late with David.
My guest today was always an overachiever. He built a company from the ground up and was a leader in his church, until one day it all fell apart. At age 70, he came out as gay, was kicked out of his church, and ended his second marriage. But today, he is now living his best life. Joining me today, author of the book, The Courage to be Courageous, and host of the podcast of the same name, Dan Bolen. Dan, welcome. So happy you're joining me today. Since you're coming out, you've been very open about leaning in and not running away from yourself. So let's just jump right in. Did you ever believe you were straight? Or when did you realize you were not straight, I guess?
I realized I was as different, as I said in my book, when I was 7 years old. I remember liking to play with the schoolboys. I was 7 years old. I was playing with my, I guess you'd say, the boys in the neighborhood, Red Rassel and so forth. And I remember really liking them, not just as friends, but at 7, you don't know what sex is. You don't know what gay is. You don't know what any of this. I felt like I was different. And I thought that different is not a good thing. Somehow I got that in my head. It's not a good thing. And you keep that from your dad and your mom. And so you start keeping a secret from them and a secret from yourself.
In your book, you talked about I was fearful, hidden, and voiceless for 7 decades.
Yes.
What kept you then from accepting yourself, and what did you fear?
I think for me, I feared losing my family, losing my friends, not being accepted. Again, in my generation, you could not come out, or there were very few people that did come out, and it was a very unsafe thing to do. So I knew I was different, the fear of losing my family, my friends, because as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you're not supposed to have friends outside of the church.
Really?
They're considered worldly.
Oh.
And so they keep you engulfed in just having friends that are Jehovah's Witnesses. So I knew when I come out that I would lose them all. I would lose them all. And I think because of that, I got buried in a religion that is extremely restrictive, very restrictive, and therefore, and I'm used to following rules. So I'm a good rule follower.
People pleaser?
Oh yeah, big people pleaser, rule follower. And I didn't have the understanding that I needed to deal with my sexuality and who I was as a person before I could actually come out. And at 70 years old, I didn't come out until I was 70, but you just keep burying and burying and burying. And working yourself all the time that you don't have to think about who you are. And anytime I'd have these feelings because I've always worked out, always gone to the health club, and I'd be given these wonderful talks in the congregation or at a convention. I'd come back and I'd see these guys in the locker room, and I would have these, oh God, and then the shame gets loaded even more on you. So so the only way you do, the more shame you get, the more work you do. You just keep addicting till you don't have to think about it anymore. I did that for 7 generations.
Wow. Let's jump back in time a bit, though. You did get married. Twice you were married.
I did.
The first one, you had a daughter. You got married at age 21.
I got married at 21.
Did your sexuality come out during that relationship at all?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because when you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you can't have sex until you're married. So a 21-year-old with a little hormones raging, I wanted to have sex. So I had to get married. And that marriage lasted 26 years. Because when you're married as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you don't divorce. So you just stick it out, except the only scriptural grounds you have is if someone commits adultery. Then you're free to remarry. After 26 years, and because it had gotten so, the relationship had festered so much that I just said, I can't do this anymore. And then I ended up in a divorce. And I wasn't allowed to marry again because I didn't have what they call a scriptural divorce, And to be honest, at that time, David, I think I was really denying that I really was a gay person. I just found myself attracted to men. And when I would do that, I just would work harder to kind of not have to deal with it. I know it's a long time to be able to do that.
So you got married then to a second woman.
I did.
Assume you resolved things with the church to be able to do that at some level.
Well, we both got disfellowshipped. We got kicked out of the church.
Which means you're like, don't exist to them then when you disfellowship?
The shunning starts.
Okay.
And what that means, you go to the meetings, nobody can talk to you, family can't have anything to do with you. It's a shunning. It's a shunning thing. And after that, I thought, I said, Sandy, I don't know if I want to come back or not. She said, well, I want to come back. And so we did. And we became very active again in the congregation. And she was well known in the Jehovah's Witnesses as a full-time pioneer minister, which means she donates a lot of time to the ministry. And so we came back, and we got back in good standing, well loved with the congregation, and I continued on my merry way, still addicting to religion and
work. Well, you talked about living this 40-60 life where you said 40% of me is heterosexual with my beautiful wife, and I'll dabble in 60% by just looking at naked men in the shower at the gym. No harm in that. Well, how did that work out for you?
Well, it's interesting because I had a psychologist that told me that, that sexuality is on a spectrum, and a spectrum because I had been with two women. I was able to father a child.
Did you think you were bisexual at the time then?
I did in my mind thinking I must be bisexual. And I think part of it is because I had a child. The second thing is because it's easier to say bisexual than it is to say gay for me in my head. And so what I ended up doing is, and that psychologist says, well, it's a spectrum for you. And I said, well, I can live really good in the 40% because I did love my wife, my second wife. And the 60%, will be manageable. It'll be manageable. And it's interesting, before Sandy and I got married, I called him and said, I didn't come out to him when I first went to him. And by the way, the psychologist was a gay man, married to his partner for several years. Wonderful, wonderful person. And I went to him before and I said, I have not told her that I'm bisexual. I don't know if I should. And he said, well, if you feel you can live really good in that 40%, you don't necessarily have to tell her anything. And so I didn't. I'm not sure that was the best advice, but that's the advice I got at the time. And for me to even deal with the fact as I was attracted to men, I was still at the time, David, still fighting myself. So to tell something to someone else, when I wasn't accepting it myself completely, I chose not to do.
So how did it finally come about and tell her that you're gay? When did that transpire?
Excellent point. And keep in mind, I was a work addict. So I sold my company. I had been very successful in our industry. So when I turned 70 years old, I sold my company. Well, I didn't have that to addict to anymore. I finally began to realize, and a lot of that was through therapy, and to realize that I'm not a broken man. I'm a man with a huge amount of shame. I've got to be able to deal with the shame of who I am. And for me, David, once I was able to deal with the shame of who Dan Bolen was, I was able to pass on my authenticity. It was not an easy trip because at the time when I came out to my wife, I had a brief affair. I had an affair with a man, went home and told her immediately. That resulted in a judicial committee, and I was disfellowshipped from the church. That was the lowest point of my life. It ended in an attempted suicide on my part. And in my mind, I thought, I do not want to die living a lie. I do not want to die living a lie to myself and living a lie to others. And so that's when I decided, of course, I'd already came out as gay to my wife, got disfellowship. She was obviously hysterical. But it was a point of turning for me when I realized that I'm a gay man. I'm beginning to like who myself is.
And was that your first time with a man too?
I had an affair one time when I was, 13 years old, and he was 15. But the shame was so deep, I never had an affair with a man until I was 70.
So so this guy, which you met at the gym in the book,
Mm-hmm.
that was the first man that you'd actually had something with.
Yeah.
How did that feel to you compared to what you knew before?
And the reason I'm kind of, it felt pretty amazing.
Okay.
And that's also when I knew, oh my God, this is who I am. And then, of course, it's went down from there with you'll see an attempted suicide. But then I had to start building myself back again. But I was still hanging on to religion, hanging on to my friends, hanging on to my family, even though I didn't have them because I'm disfellowshipped. And so I tried for over a year. And then finally, I had done enough work on myself through therapy and through my own personal growth and work that I sat down with my wife and I said, Sandy, you can't be married to a gay man. Her requirement was if we stay together, then I have to come back to the church and I have to be reinstated. And I said, I said to her, I came out of the closet. I'm not going back in. And I think for me, I think that was, David, I think that was the most powerful moment for me when I was able to say to her, I need a divorce. I don't want you to be married to a gay man. And it was grief on my part because I loved her as much as I've loved a woman.
Well, how did she react? Was she surprised? Was this new news to her? Did she have an inkling of thinking something was going on?
No, she was devastated. She did not want the divorce, even though I had committed adultery, and she didn't want it. But I also knew for me and for her, it had to be the best decision for both of us. And what happened for me, once I made the decision, it was painful, but I had a sense of peace that I've never had before. I mean, I had a deep sense of peace. I know who I am. I'm a gay man. I'm not going to I can't give her everything she needs as a gay man. I just can't give her, and she can't give me everything I need as a heterosexual woman. So it's been almost 4 years.
And I want to pause just a second because I don't want to let this go by for others. Because I talked to other men, some that have never had a sexual experience with a man, and they're unsure that they're gay, but they know how they feel. And I just want to make the point, as you just made, is that you knew you were gay, but you had never had a sexual experience yet. And it was validated essentially when you did, but didn't necessarily need that to validate your feelings that you'd had for 70 years that you could recall. You know, it's the powerful inside us. We kind of know, when people say, how do you know? Well, you just know.
And you do know. You also bury it so deeply that after a while you don't know.
Yeah,
I
with
mean,
all the
it's hard
shame
for
and the
people to
guilt.
understand that. Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that was powerful for me, David, if I can share this with our audience here, I came to a point that I loved myself as a beautiful gay man. I'm a wonderful gay man. I'm not saying that because of ego. I'm saying that I am a giving man. I've always been giving to people. I've always been the patriarch of my family. I'm in a business where I'm giving and helping people with their careers. That's just who I am. But I'm gay. And to me, I came to a point, and I think this was powerful for me, if I could share it. Nobody defines who I am. My wife does not define who I am. My church does not define who I am. My partner, John, does not define who I am. My friends do not define who I am. Religion does not define who I am. You, David, do not define who I am. I define who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And where the strength for me and the power for me came from that is that regardless of what happens in my life, I'm with a very beautiful man. We've been together, as I mentioned, 4 years. But if something happened and we weren't together, I would grieve. I would grieve, very serious grief. But I would be okay because I define me.
It's beautiful. I like that. That is the first step of acceptance, is accepting yourself before others can even consider.
Yeah, I think that, and that to me was a powerful point. And finally, when I was able to believe it for myself, I've been able to share that with others.
More of my interview with Dan in just a moment. But first, I'd like to recommend a book I found insightful on my own coming out journey. The book is Daring Greatly: How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead by Brené Brown. In Daring Greatly, you'll explore vulnerability, courage, and the power of embracing one's own authentic self. While the book may not directly address coming out experiences, its insights into shame, vulnerability, and the importance of wholehearted living are invaluable for anyone on a journey of self-discovery and personal development. Again, the book is Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. For more books and online resources about coming out later in life, visit outlatewithdavid.com. To read more about today's guest and his personal story, check out his book, The Courage to be Courageous, a memoir of struggle, success, and truth. Now back to more of my conversation with Dan. So you mentioned you had a partner. How did you find him after you went through this? And now you're this gay man who's accepted himself. You're divorced. You've lost all your friends. You lost your spouse. And now it's Dan.
That is correct.
Was Dan just sitting alone in his home then for some period of time?
Well, I think for me, I began to realize I've lost a community. And I have to find a community. And the community is not going to find me because they don't know I exist. I got to find one.
Yeah.
So I started finding a community, and that's when I joined Frontrunners Organization, international gay group.
It's a running club, isn't it?
It's called Frontrunners and Walkers. It's an international group, which people, Frontrunners and Walkers, we belong to them here in Phoenix and also in San Diego, where my condo is in La Jolla. And so I found a community. Now, I was not, because my wife did not want me going back to the same gym where I met this person, I had to change gyms to satisfy her. That's when I met John. So, and John and I became very good friends. He did not know initially I was gay. We found that out by talking, and he had been married. He was married to a man, came out gay when he was in his mid-20s. So he became a friend. And finally, I was open to him and telling him I was going through a divorce and that I was gay. And even that was hard for me because I'm still kind of in a rookie of trying to figure this out and he became my best friend. And John and I were best friends before we ended up falling in love. We both ended up getting divorces. Of course, I got a divorce before he did. And then we became friends. And he's my life partner. He enhances my life. He just doesn't define it.
What about the larger community besides him? Have you found a larger community since you lost your church family and your own family, I'd assume as well? If they're all members of the church, you lost everybody?
I lost everybody except my daughter. My daughter, who is not active as Jehovah's Witness, totally accepts her dad as gay.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And 2 of my 3 grandchildren accept their dad as gay. My other granddaughter does not, because she's part of the church and will not have anything to do with me. And the only thing I can give her is forgiveness, and give my family and friends that I lost forgiveness. But what ended up happening, that we become part of Frontrunners. We have an organized group every Friday that meets downtown Phoenix That's probably 20 or 30 people. 3 or 4 of them I've interviewed on my podcast. And my community has just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. I have many heterosexual friends. I think I'm addicted to pickleball, which I play 3 times a week. I have many good friends there. Some gay, most of them not. In fact, the majority are not. And many of them have read my book and my story. And so there is a network of friends out there. And it's just a matter of, I don't sit back and wait for them to come. I try to take the initiative and bring people into my world. So we have some incredible gay friends. And I'm so proud that we've taken the action to be able to do that.
As a life coach, I'm committed to help you discover the passions in your life and help you map a course to achieve the things you really want. Together, we will unwind those persistent self-doubts that are holding you back. You'll begin to see your passions more clearly and set achievable goals. Throughout your journey, I'll be there to challenge and encourage you in moving forward to discover your authentic self. For more information about my personal life coaching services, or to arrange a complimentary consultation, visit davidcottoncoaching.com.
You're listening to Out Late with David.
I want to jump back in time. There's one thing that's just in my head. I can't put the dots together. After 70 years, you had the fling with the guy in the gym and then went and told your wife at the time, this is what I've done, which ended your marriage. What was the motivating factor you think that really brought you to that point where you crossed that line?
Wow. I had been getting therapy. She had been getting therapy. I had come out and told her before I had the affair that I had same-sex interest. That was so shaming for me. And I think once I sold my business and then I was going to the club and this gentleman was younger than me and it just ended up happening. What happened was extremely phenomenal. Okay. Then I knew, it kind of defined that I really knew who I was, and so I think that was where I began to realize and understand that I was a gay man. I don't know if I asked your question or not on that, David.
What I heard is that the barrier of your focus of your work by selling your business freed up your brain,
yes,
possibly, to expand. I tell a similar story. I was no longer working for the Department of Defense where they asked the questions, are you a communist? Do you advocate overthrow the U.S. government? And are you homosexual? That I used to get. And once I was out of that environment, that freed up my brain. And I believe that was one of the reasons why I came to my realization that I was gay. So it sounds similar to you.
Do you realize when you answered, no, I'm not gay, did you realize that is a lie, or were you even denying you were gay?
I was denying the thoughts that I was having, but at the same time, I was terrified that I would be discovered what was in my head. It was a contradiction that was huge.
Yes.
I'd say, no, I'm not gay. As long as people can do what they want to do, just don't, approach me. So it was hypocritical and homophobic.
I totally get that, because I think in my mind, I denied it so deeply and for so long, so deeply. I think I could have passed a lie detector test and said I was not gay. That's how deeply I buried it. Yeah. Because that tells you what shame does.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does.
Shame will cause you to deny things, and the most serious thing you deny is who you are. That's the biggest shame thing, is denying who you are.
You'd said that you were excited by the specter of telling truth because vulnerability can also bring peace. So what are you doing now that gives you that sense of peace on a daily basis?
That's a great question. I think I get up in the mirror every morning and look and say, I like what I see in the mirror. I think how I ended up writing this book, The Courage to Be Courageous, I wrote it because I lost my whole family. And my therapist said, have you ever thought about writing a book, a memoir? And I said, well, I'm not a writer. He said, well, I can put you in contact with a professional writer. I said, okay, I'll write it, because I was going through all of this therapy, but only so my family can see the real Danny. They call me Danny because they're not going to see the real Danny because they won't talk to me.
So this is really a letter to them then, is the motivation?
It actually is a letter to them and a letter to my ex-wife, who I still love dearly. We all have fear in our life. Mm-hmm. It's common. We all have courage. And my book and my podcast are about embracing the fear and using courage to go through it. And finally, my voice comes out through my memoir and through my podcasts. I get more out of the podcast from my guests than I feel that I give them. Every time I do a podcast, I just get excited to hear the courage of people have, what they've had to overcome in their life, and how they've been able to move on as their authentic self. Mm-hmm. And so because of that now, and I'm scheduled to do 4 podcasts a month, that's where my time is being spent. I have to be a little careful because I'm a recovering workaholic. And the number one priority in my life is taking care of me. The second priority is taking care of my partner, John. And third is my podcast. But it's a voice, because so many of our rights are being taken away. Mm-hmm. And one of the organizations I support is the SAGE organization. And they say, without a voice, we are silent. And when we're silent, nothing gets done. Mm-hmm. And I'm not silent anymore. I was silent for 70 years. I have a voice. And not everybody will necessarily agree with every part of my podcast. Not every people are in favor of it. I understand that, and I accept that. But they don't have to listen to it, okay? Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things and the gifts that I've been able to give to our community, is to have a voice for them.
Well, thank you for doing that. Mm-hmm. So for those that are having the realization there's something about their sexuality they're not sure about, what is the key piece of advice that you'd give to them?
Be honest with yourself. Be honest and define who you are. And that may cause some layers to come off. That certainly will cause fear. But be honest with yourself. Don't look for someone outside you to define who you are.
Thank you. I think that's good advice. Know yourself. Be honest with yourself. Understand your fears and work through them, is what I heard. And thank you today for the time and sharing your story and the advice, because as you know, like I do, these stories are powerful. They'll help people we don't even know are out there. Someone will hear this, someone will share this, and will help them in some way for them to move on in their life. So thank you.
Can I share something with you, David?
Yes.
I am so proud to have met David in my life, because we're on the same page. We're doing podcasts to help people to be able to be a safe place for them to fall. And I thank you so much for the work you're doing. I applaud you for what you're doing. And you're making a big difference in our community. I've listened to several of your podcasts. They're outstanding. They're amazing. And continue up the good work, because you are part of the voice of our community. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dan Bolen. And thank you for being here today. I learned from you too, as I said earlier, reading your book, and made me reflect on myself. So you're having an impact there as well.
In Dan telling his story, it made me realize something about myself. I might have been an overachiever as well, to mask who I really am, a gay man. For Dan, he realized he became an overachiever to keep his family and personal secrets quiet, with the biggest secret being he was a gay man. He did everything to become number one. He depended on others to give him esteem from his work ethic because he had no self-esteem. This might be true for many of us, whether we realize it or not. We don't have the validation from those we love for who we really are, because they may not know our true self, so we put our energy into areas where we can be recognized and validated for our success. If this resonates with you, pause and explore what you might be hiding from yourself and others. That's it for now. Join us next time on Out Late with David.
To hear more episodes, visit outlatewithdavid.com. And to learn more about personal life coaching services, go to davidcottoncoaching.com.